given by Pierre Marché from Sorbonne University, and he will talk about quantitative convergence bounds for unadjusted HMC or underdamped Langevin.
Thank you, Andrea, for the introduction, and thank you, Sam, and the other organizers for the organizing this very nice conference. I really enjoyed all the previous talks, so I'll try to be at least as interesting as everybody else, hopefully. So, okay, we have seen this a lot, so just to set notations, I have some target measure pi, which is on the RD, and I will be mostly interested in kinetic samplers where you extend the space with a velocity. The velocity is really by definition the derivative of your position, and the target measure in the extended space will be my target measure and some standard Gaussian for the velocity. And the reason we are interested in kinetic processes in view of the program we are in is typically because, okay, this move during the time t, it moves at distance t, x position moves at time t, while a Brownian motion moves at distance t squared. So this is what is called ballistic, and this is what is called diffusive. And of course, if you've been a bit in this program, people with anomalous diffusion are not necessarily interested in that guy, but rather in stranger things like that. Okay, but in MCMC we have like 20. Okay, let's be gentle. Let's just say 25% literature. No, sorry, about this guy. And even in this week, it was a lot of this guy. And we have this, and we have epsilon square percent. This with some strange Levy flights or whatever. Okay, but so here I am only talking about these guys, but that's why I'm interested in kinetic things. Okay. All right, so here are the bunch of guys we could want to do. We have overdamped Langevin at the beginning, so not kinetic, and we have two guys living with a position velocity space. Kinetic Langevin, where you have some friction parameter gamma here, that you have to choose, and you have HMC, so generalized, meaning that possibly you have some partial refreshment of the velocity. So you run the Hamiltonian dynamics for some time, and in this talk, the time will be mostly deterministic, but we'll talk to that later. So T is a parameter you have to choose, and theta, which is this this refreshment parameter, is also something to be chosen. So if you take the very classical case would be eta equal to 0, so you run the Hamiltonian dynamics for some time, and at time t you completely get rid of your current velocity and get a brand new nice velocity at equilibrium, and you proceed. Okay, so of course those guys are not feasible in practice, except in Gaussian cases maybe, because you cannot solve these equations, so you discretize them. And the nice thing is that in fact when you discretize them, you realize that these three guys are the same guy. In fact, it's at least there is a splitting scheme which is the same, is the same for the three previous SDEs. It's just depending on the parameter you choose, you are going to converge to either HMC or kinetic Langevin or overdamped Langevin, but in fact it's really the same family. So you have three parameters. So you have a step size, sorry, of your discretization. You have a number of Verlet steps. So this is these three steps here is a leapfrog or Verlet step for the Hamiltonian dynamics. So you have delta, which is a step size here. You can do that k times if you want, and then you do possibly partial refreshment of the velocity. Okay, and so if you want to converge to the continuous time Langevin diffusion, you just do one step of Verlet and then this partial refreshment, and then so the refreshment is going to 1. So you do a very small modification of your velocity, of course. So you keep most of your velocity and you just do something of order delta, which is your step size modification. HMC, so what I call sometimes position HMC, meaning that I can eta equal to 0, so that the position itself is a Markov chain. Otherwise, you have to keep your velocity. Okay, so that would correspond to k, which is the number of iterations here. It's of order 1 over delta. So with t being it's t over delta, with t the physical time you are aiming at simulating. for your trajectory. And if you do something both, like k equal 1, eta equal to 0, so you do just one step and then you completely refresh your velocity, you get the Euler scheme for the overdamp Langevin, except that the step size is not delta, it's delta square. Okay, but all those guys are the same, are in this family. Of course, you could do other splitting schemes for Langevin, for instance. For instance, we had the UBU of Katarina in Tuesday, which is not of this type, but okay. This is the family I am interested in for reasons that will be clearer later on, and this is the kind of trajectories you get. So this guy is really HMC, you follow, so this is, you don't see the velocity, it's not a phase diagram, it's really position in 2D. This is a Gaussian isotropic target. You do an Hamiltonian dynamics and then you completely forget your velocity and start anew. Here this is HMC but with some inertia, so you do an Hamiltonian dynamics, but then when you refresh your velocity, you keep a bit, so you're correlated with your previous velocity, so you tend to keep in the same direction. This is when you do at more and more often less and less strong modification, so you go to Langevin, and so these are 3 Langevin, meaning that you modify your velocity at each step k, at each step of your at each Verlet step, but then you still have this gamma parameter you can play with, and so small gamma is I don't refetch much, so I am mainly still deterministic and Hamiltonian somehow, and as gamma increase I have more noise in my velocity, and as a gamma increase, in the discrete case, I can even take gamma to be plus infinity, which is just taking eta to be 0. I get something diffusive like that. So okay, so it goes from ballistic to diffusive in this picture. But okay, so this is for short trajectories. But of course, any choice of parameter, at least many choice of parameters, are completely relevant because they give you some ergodic chain. So this is HMC, so you do something deterministic and then you refresh. This is more Langevin style, but it's still ergodic. So maybe just a remark with respect to the first talk of Werner, because HMC, you see here, it's completely continuous trajectories in my case. So, sorry, I forgot to say it. I will be mostly unadjusted here. Okay, so I have a discretization error. Okay, so here you have continuous trajectories, so you see it's not really non-local because you just follow a continuous line. Of course, when you metropolize, you think of jumping from one way to another, but okay, even if you metropolize, the way you propose something is by going through a continuous line, and more importantly, it's going through a line which is motivated by local information, which is gradients. Okay, so it's not completely non-local. I mean, you are not jumping in the void in high dimension. You are still following local information. So, well, just a remark. So, okay. We can discuss it more in detail. But in any case, for me, since I am unadjusted, somehow the intermediary steps have as much value as the points where I refresh. I had no particular reasons to discard these guys. They are part of the sample. So I have trajectories like that. They are ergodic. Of course, something which can go wrong and which is well known, it's if you take the integration time t to be exactly a period of your Hamiltonian system, you just start with some velocity, you run your Hamiltonian system, you're back at the same place, you take a brand new velocity, but the period is still the same, so you're just going to do that all the time and you never converge. And that's typically the reason why HMC is very sensible to tuning T, because so you have some harmonic resonances where you're exactly at a period, you just don't converge. So as soon as you get a bit too close to a period, immediately the convergence rate becomes very bad, and we'll see this in more details later on, but this is what is happening in these cases.
And you call this recurrence or how?
Resonance. No. This is not. This guy is not targeting the correct. If you do an average on that, it's not ergodic with respect to your target. And it's going to be ergodic to some measure which depends on your initial condition. Or you are going to sample something. Okay, so usually when I present this, I start by a general result and then I have no time to go through the Gaussian case. But here I do the convert because it's basically the only case where I can say something not completely uninteresting about that. Okay, so let's. So the nice thing with the Gaussian case, of course, is it has absolutely no interest in practice because you don't do Gaussians like that. But okay, you can do everything completely explicitly. And here we can do really an optimization. Okay, we have 3 parameters: number of step size, number of Verlet steps, inertia, so friction parameter eta, refreshment parameter. Okay, we can say, okay, what is the best one? So which is the 1 million question? Is it better HMC or Langevin? Rhinoceros or elephant? Okay, same story. Okay, so here we can do that for the Gaussian case, and here is the setup of my optimization. Okay, I don't want something superly fine-tuned for one given Gaussian target, because if I do that, okay, I can do super clever things. I want something a bit robust because, in fact, I'm not interested in Gaussian. I'm using this as a proxy problem to think, okay, when I'm going to be in some mode, basically, if I have something a bit robust for Gaussian, it's going to be not completely stupid for sampling locally a mode or whatever. Okay, so I get something which I get all Gaussian distributions where the covariance matrix is between two bounds, so lower bounds M, upper bound L. Okay, usual notation that we already saw in the previous talks, I think. Okay, and I want to compare algorithms among the full family. Okay, so and I want a fair comparison. That's what is nice here is I really have practical algorithms with the discretization. You see, when you have continuous time process, it's a bit the problem Gabriel had. It's how do you no, not compensate, normalize. How do you normalize to compare two guys in continuous time? Okay, and here we don't really have this problem. So we really do something which is fair and natural, which is I only compare guys. Okay, so P is the parameters here, these three guys, which have the same error in terms of Wasserstein distance. So pi s is the target and pi sp is the invariant measure of whatever I do, my sampler, okay? And I guess I want to be good against all this family, okay? So I don't know which guy I choose my parameter, and then you give me as many guys as you want from this family, and I know I have some guarantee on my error, and I only compare parameters if they are if they have the same accuracy, okay? And for this parameter, I want to optimize this, which is the asymptotic convergence rate. So typically, you have the Wasserstein distance after n iteration, which is going to be some constant or maybe polynomial prefactor here and this. Okay, and basically I'm only interested in that guy. Okay, you could say maybe by optimizing this, I will get a prefactor which is completely crazy, and the short story it's no, because when you optimize, you get something which behaves well and converges to continuous time processes for which the prefactor is something, okay, it's not plus infinity, and so, okay, optimizing this, you will depend on n highly, so, and you will just get a logarithmic correction, so it's not really, it doesn't change much, okay, so this is the lambda I'm interested in, but in fact, I divide by k, okay, because k is the number of Verlet steps, so it's how many times I compute the gradient per transitions. So this rho of p is not the convergence rate per iteration, is the gradient convergence rate per computation of the gradient, which is the numerical thing. Okay, so you see, it's really natural and somehow really fair how we compare things, and okay. And so we can okay, okay. So let's look at how rho of p behaves. So first thing, if you have three parameters, but in this Gaussian case, there is some kind of miracle, as usual with Gaussian, which is, in fact, the error only depends on delta, the step size. So somehow you just fixing epsilon is just fixing delta, and so you have two remaining parameters, which is the length of your Hamiltonian trajectory and the refreshment parameter. Okay, so you can say, okay, I'm only interested, so sorry. First, you work with the scale invariant parameters, which are these guys, so kappa is the condition number. Let's say I only want to look at position HMC, so E2 equal to 0, I just have K to optimize. It is optimized, it's on T star, so of course now it's Gaussian distribution, so it's linear algebra. So you have to diagonalize 2 by 2 matrices, and you get that. Okay, so we can do it. You get some optimal T star, which is the same as here, in fact. And you get, okay, when the accuracy or goes to 0 that you want, or the delta, the dimension, sorry, goes to infinity, basically you have some nice expression. And if you're interested in badly conditioned problems, you get this. And you see there is a 1 over kappa for HMC, and it's the very same 1 over kappa that we had in previous talks, like Giacomo Zanella, maybe some also some power at the same 1 over kappa. Yeah, so this is the very same 1 over kappa, okay? And if you, okay, so this is for HMC. If you do for Langevin, so you fix K to be 1 and you optimize your gamma, so which is your eta here, so it's the same. You get something optimal, which is this one, and you have a 1 over square root of kappa, okay? So basically, this is the story which is happening here. Anyway, and now you can, of course, optimize the 2 parameters simultaneously. So, of course, you are going to be better than any of the 2 previous guys because you optimize everything. And so you get the same optimal integration time, and so you get some super nice formula. But anyway, for badly conditioned system, this is equivalent to what you get for optimal Langevin. And lastly, if you don't have this condition here, you just have no convergence. It's exactly resonances. Okay, you have, if you are there, you have a periodic. You can have in your whole family of Gaussian, you will have a periodic trajectories. Okay, so just a remark, look at the optimal guy. The optimal guy is when M is negligible with respect to L, which is badly conditioned systems. Okay, T star is not far from pi over square root of L, and pi over square root of L is exactly when you have no convergence. Okay, so optimal guy is very, very close to no convergence at all. This is the sensibility of the parameters. Let's look. Okay, so this is what is written here. So let's say you design your parameter having in mind some bounds L and M, and then you apply it to a system where the upper bound is slightly above what you thought. You go from optimal to 0. Okay, so no convergence directly. So this is what is happening. So this is some proxy of the convergence time. Okay, and you have 3 curves depending on eta. So eta, the blue one is no inertia at all, so you refresh completely your velocity. The red one is a half, and the green one is a lot of inertia, 0.9. Okay, so they all have the same peaks here because it's a function of the integration time. Okay, of course these peaks are exactly, and this is Gaussian in dimension d with eigenvalues which are evenly distributed. Whenever you see an eigenvalue, you get some periodic thing, and so you don't converge. Okay, so and it's the same whatever eta. I mean, you can refresh as you want. You have periodic transforms. So this is the same. We'll come to that. This is exactly the next slide. But for now, let's keep on that. So there is 3 parts in this graph. There is the story by this graph is of 3 parts. So you have these resonances, and then if you forget the peaks, you have some trend like that. So before it's going down and then up, and it's the same for the 3 lines, but not at the same scale. In fact, the correct scaling to see this is not to express this in terms of t, but of t over 1 minus eta. Okay, and so this is the same curves, just modified in terms of this parameter. And if you look at the beginning, the 3 curves are basically the same. Okay, and then something else happens. So of course the peaks here are together. So here the peaks are no more together. Okay, and there is a very intuitive reason to that. I mean, so you are in a badly conditioned Gaussian case. Okay, so your algorithm has no idea. You don't need to know the eigenvalues. Okay, the coordinates of corresponding to eigenvectors of the Gaussians are going to be independent. Okay, so you have some large directions here, and the distance here, the deviation, standard deviation here is of order 1 over square root of m. So this is the kind of distance you want to move across. So let's look at, okay, I just look at this direction because directions are independent. Okay, and this is time. I start with a velocity in this space which is of order 1 because each coordinate has a velocity of order 1. And then what is this t over what is this t over 1 minus eta? It's exactly the time you need to forget your initial velocity. So if it's of course trivial if eta is 0 because you just completely get rid of your velocity, but you have some exponential decay, and this is a typical time where your velocity is completely uncorrelated. You have forgotten what was your initial velocity at that time. Okay, so you start with some velocity, and you do some run here. for a time which again is of order this. Okay, so again, if you're Langevin, you are doing something like that, but basically you have a ballistic run for a time which is this. Okay, and if you look at all the optimal choices here, they are all doing the very same thing. They are saying this should be of order 1 over square root of m, because that's the typical distance I have to move. Okay, so typically when you're choosing the optimal guys, they are moving across this direction at the same scale. And if you don't do that, of course, you're diffusive because you're doing a very small step, then you forget your velocity, so essentially you are Markovian now, and so you have a random walk behavior. And so if you move small steps here, you have to cross distances of order 1 over square root of m. You need a number of time, which is the square of that, okay? And then this is your 1 over kappa versus 1 over square root of kappa coming in. And, okay, so you see that the important parameter here at the beginning of the curve, okay, the beginning here is this guy for this reason, okay? It's the time you need to forget your initial velocity, and so it's a typical time you have a ballistic behavior, and you want that to match the distances you have there. Okay, so of course, if you have no inertia, to have this, so 1 over square root of m is very large, so you want this to be very large, but if eta is 0, you want t to be very large, but when you want t to be very large, you hit the resonances, so you are dead. So somehow inertia helps you reaching this optimal value way before this kicks in. Okay, and then there is the third part of the story, it's y, and then it increases, but then the problem of convergence becomes of the slow modes, because if you have too much inertia, okay, so the slow modes are going to turn around, which is not a problem, but if you're really very ballistic, so very Hamiltonian, you never mixes across energy levels, and the decrease of convergence here comes to that. Okay, and if you are more spectral people, so I think there was this, there is some interpretation in terms of what is the spectral gap of your operator. So here it's Gaussian, so anyway, the Gaussian, the spectral properties of the spectral gap of the full process is given by the spectral gap of the drift matrix, so it's completely clear. Okay, so what happens is that when you're not ballistic enough, your spectral gap is a real eigenvalue which is basically related to the largest mode and how you don't move again across the largest modes. And when you increase your inertia, so your time t 1 over minus theta. So this guy is moving, and then he's meeting with another eigenvalue. So at some point you have the singular eigenvalue. This is the optimal guy, and then after that, if you continue going on, the eigenvalue become two imaginary eigenvalues because I am non-reversible. I have a complex spectrum. Okay. And now so the spectral gap becomes this. Okay, there is no eigenvalue here, but you have two eigenvalues, and when you have imaginary eigenvalues, it's because something is circling around, and this is now the problem. This is what is the problem of your converters. Okay, so something about this 1 over square root of m. It's exactly what is given by this analysis with space-time Poincare inequalities. Of Cao, Lu Wang, and also Andreas and Francis here, if you saw the poster of Francis. Yeah, so typically they tell you either for Langevin how you should scale gamma, or for randomized HMC how you should scale your refreshment rate. That exactly tells you that the optimal thing is 1 over square root of m, which is the same story as I say, which is the time you have to keep your initial velocity should be the time the typical distance you have to cross in a large mode. Okay, so again, the interest of inertia is that you can take that guy to be large while avoiding to be in the peaks. And again, if you look at the optimal guy in the previous slide, I said he is highly sensitive. Okay, he is playing dangerously because somehow the optimal guy is saying, I am going to choose eta so that my maximum is just before the peaks, okay? Because then the minimum here is going to be slightly better than the minimum here, Okay, so you're gaining not much because at the end those guys are equivalent. So for badly conditioned systems, you are playing dangerously close to resonances, but Langevin, like Langevin style with a lot of inertia, k equal 1 is in the safer part of this story, because okay, if k is 1, you really need to have resonances of order of your step size. Okay, and if your step size is chosen for your accuracy, somehow it's going to be very small. Okay, so going back to randomizing, so okay, these results are from this family of unadjusted generalized HMC, but the story of why you don't converge and this ballistic to diffusive behavior is the same for basically all kinetic processes. So if you metropolize, you have the very same structure. Okay. If you do your favorite kinetic PDMP, you have some randomness, even if you don't randomize the. So here the time at which you refresh is not random, but you already have some intrinsic randomness in your drift, or at least in your initial motion. So you don't have the peaks, but you still have the same picture otherwise. And if I rescale by this t1 minus eta, I also get in the PDMP case that the initial curves, I mean the curves that initially decay for the same reason and at the same scale. Okay, and this is if you randomize the time. Okay, so I said my time t is deterministic, but so here I don't randomize time t, I randomize the step size, which somehow is something you should always do because there is no reasons not to do it, and it's going to kill even the resonances which are at the level of your step size. Okay, so if you randomize, you kill all the resonances, but you still get the same picture otherwise. Okay, you have the same story about inertia. Okay, and that was the previous one, and you see it's the same for PDMPs except you have no peaks. Okay. Okay. So this uniform between 1/2 and 2 of what I wanted, or something like that. Yeah, or 0 and 2, or anyway, kind of thing. Yeah, stupidest thing you can think of. Okay, so this motivates some interest in this family, because you see that the optimal guy is neither Langevin nor HMC, it's somewhere in the middle, so somehow that's what motivated me to, and so it was a bunch of papers okay, can I say something about the whole family together? And this is one result in this direction. So here are the assumptions. So I'm going to write the potential as a mean field thing, but if you don't like it, it's not an assumption, because you can take n to be 1, v to be u, and epsilon to be 0. Okay. So the interest of writing it like that is somehow I distinguish two dimensions, n and q. So the dimension is n times q. If I am in a mean field case, the dimension is n, is proportional to n. And if I am in the general case, dimension is q. And you will see that n and q do not come up at the same place in the final estimate. I am in a very smooth case where, so typically those guys v and w have bounded derivatives of order 2, 3, and 4. So here it's because, okay, I use splitting schemes. They are second order schemes. They are meant to use the smoothness. They are interesting because we are targeting something smooth. If we are targeting something not as smooth as that, we get a first order error, and we can just do the Euler scheme, and it works the same. Okay, so here, and as you will see in my result, I don't get this ballistic to diffusive behavior, but I get the second order error improvement with respect to doing Euler scheme for overdamped, or Euler scheme for underdamped, or Euler scheme for PDMPs, as we discussed before. So anyway, so okay, this is interesting. So these schemes, as I presented with the results I have, is interesting when you have something smooth. Okay, so we have this restriction here, which I recall that this is optimal because then you have periodic trajectories, and so somehow I am replacing pi by 1/10 to have better bounds, but this is essentially what it means. And I assume that I have a Log-Sobolev inequality, so I can have a non-convex potential. And so if you, I'm not completely sure, we already saw Log-Sobolev inequality this week. So if you are not familiar with it, it is exactly the optimal convergence rate of the overdamped Langevin, continuous time overdamped Langevin dynamics in relative entropy. Okay, it's really, I mean, if you had no discretization error and you are really running the overdamped Langevin, you get this convergence rate, and it's something which carry a lot of information about how hard is your problem. For instance, if you are multimodal, okay, this is going to appear here. Okay, and then I assume that I have moments up to order 6 because I'm going to be high order, so I'll do some Taylor expansion, so I get some powers here. So I have some uniform moments, uniform in time. Okay, so this is my chain. And okay, in practice, you can check that by Lyapunov arguments. And similarly, you have many tools to check that you have a Log-Sobolev inequality. But okay, I will express the result in terms of these parameters here. So just a remark, okay, it's power 6. This x and this v are vectors in OR-Q. Okay, so this is a d-dimensional vector. If it is Gaussian, for instance, v is going to be Gaussian at equilibrium. Q to the cube is exactly the 6 moments of standard Gaussian. Okay, but you see that since I do the sum over particles, this is linear in n. Okay, so you see that n and q don't have the same, don't play the same game here. Okay. All right, and here is the result. So we look at the so nu is the law. So nu n here is the law of the chain after n iterations. So this L is a modified entropy, which is some term which, so H is relative density with respect to the equilibrium. So this is the relative entropy, or the KL if you want. And this is something positive, which looks like a Fisher information. Okay, so this is larger than the KL. And you get an exponential decay in n, which is a number of iterations. And you get some numerical error. And long story short, there is a lot of parameters, and we are super happy with absolutely every parameter there. So I'm so happy with delta that I put it in red here. Okay, this is the step size, and I have something of order 4. Okay, this is relative entropy, so if you want total variation of Wasserstein, you use Pinsker or Talagrand, you get a square root. So you get square root of this, and so you get that the total variation error you have, or Wasserstein distance you have, is delta square, because you are doing second order schemes. This is exactly what you wanted. Dependency in the n, if you're in a Millfield case, the entropy is linear with n, and you get a linear error in n in your discretization scheme, so happy. The convergence rate here is, so k delta is the physical time that you are running, so somehow this is an equivalent of the continuous time, this is to be compared to the continuous time convergence rate you would have, and this is scaling as, okay, so first it depends only on this parameter gamma, which is t over 1 minus eta, which is the same guy I had before. This is this guy, okay, this is how long I keep my velocity, I keep memory of my initial velocity, and you see that my estimate only depends on this parameter and the Log-Sobolev constant, meaning that if you give me two schemes, one which is HMC style, one which is Langevin style, but they both have the same gamma, I have the same estimate for them, because somehow the gamma is what explains my convergence, and I get the same estimate, okay? Okay, something I'm not completely happy here is that if you apply that to Gaussian, you don't recover the previous result, because if you optimize this in terms of gamma, you see that you want A to be as large as possible, and A depends only on gamma, so there is an optimal gamma completely, which is like 1 or 2 or whatever. It's completely independent from, to optimize my bound, it's completely independent from the target. Okay, so I cannot say it's good to take gamma of order 1 over square root of m. Okay, it doesn't appear in the result here. And I would say it's normal because I am in a very general case with non-convex targets, and with non-convex targets, I have absolutely no reason to believe that there will be a square root improvement from going to diffusive to ballistic, because basically in the general case, so if you think multimodality, so like you are doing exponential minus beta u, and you have low energy parts, so high probability parts separated by small probability regions. And basically, if you have any local Markov chain, so local meaning you only move continuously or small jumps, which doesn't move at a velocity super high. So now think about the talk of Gabriel where he wanted to put some diffusivity scaling like that, so you want it to be completely crazy at the transition. So as Gabriel said, okay, you don't do that, you cap your velocity, so you don't move at infinite speed, okay? And if you have that, and you are ergodic, then you are doomed to have the Arrhenius convergence law, because the amount of time you are going to spend here on average by ergodicity should be equal to the ratio of the probability of that to the probability of that. And each time you do a transition, you spend a little time here because you don't move at infinite speed. And so it really means that the time between transition is the same for all those guys. You cannot do better with all those guys than exponential beta time as beta goes to infinity at least and up to a bunch of polynomial terms. Basically, you are doomed to have this guy, and so this is for kinetic Langevin, for overdamp Langevin, for HMC, and so you don't have a square root here in any of them. Okay, you really have the same rate. So again, in the very general case, I don't get an improvement, and that I mean that's not the problem of my bone; it's the problem of life and of multimodal life. Okay, and just to say and to do one remark with. More in relation with the talk of Eric van den Eyden. Okay, I said you're basically doomed if you have that, so what can you do? Okay, I didn't wrote it, but another assumption here is that I am Markovian. Okay, and this is what you should stop doing if you want to tackle that, and this is what people have stopped doing in some cases. And how do you, why are you not Markovian? Because this is all this business of adaptive methods. You sample. From this sampling, you get some information about your landscape. You tune some auxiliary function, like non-equilibrium transport or some collective variables and free energies or whatever. And then you use that to bias your system and to move. Okay? And so this auxiliary variable that you are learning, it's a memory because you fit it with your past trajectory. And as you move, you update it. Okay? And so this is really how you should explore multimodal. I mean, if you have absolutely no information of you're in high dimension, you don't know where to go, you have to explore. Okay, exploring without having memory is, I mean, there is no, you cannot do that. Okay? So inertia is instantaneous memory. You remember where you were, and you remember where you were just a second ago, and that you were going in some direction. You keep it, but inertia is not. So inertia is going to be prescribed by whatever is here, what it is, and it's going to be too small to. So it's going, if you have small potentials here with minima, maybe inertia is going to average that I got. But when you have multi-scale things, inertia is not going to. This is going to happen at time scales which are much longer than this time you forget your velocity. Yes.
So to say that not all barriers are
energetic. No.
Barriers. You can very well have entropic barriers.
Yeah.
And there are lots of theories that you people have found out where you show that beta algorithms can get much better through.
Yeah, exactly. So it's clearly true. It's clear that this is convenient for mathematical analysis and to say a bunch of things, but when you do that, you only see energetic barriers at the end, and you don't see entropic barriers. And indeed, what we see somehow here, it's when you have something flat, this is an entropic barrier, and inertia is basically doing that. And also, I would say, you also have something of entropic here, which is how so here you have some saddle, and entropy is how difficult is it to find this. And when you have inertia, as soon as you are here, you arrive with a velocity, you cross. If you're diffusive, you end up here, you have half a chance to go back and half a chance to go back. And typically this is what you see in Ehring-Kramer's formula in the prefactor. But okay, of this.
There's a bottleneck, right? There's a bottleneck. I mean, you know, that's a more general to say that there's an energetic barrier. You can say there's a bottleneck, and the speed at which you go through the bottleneck is driven by the capacity of your graph.
So.
And it can go slow or fast.
Yeah, so what is very nice with this bound is that it's every entropic barriers, energetic barriers, even at finite beta, this is encoded in the log-Sobolev inequality. And then somehow I'm saying that if you look at our bound, when the log-Sobolev constants become plus infinity, which is a bad thing, the constant scales is linear in the log-Sobolev constant, which is exactly what we want, okay? And so now I don't have to discuss in which regime I am. I am in a bad regime, where I have a bad conductance and so a bad log-Sobolev inequality, and things are bad, but bad for all the family together, okay? Which is nice. And also our bounds are in fact, so, we have slightly sharper bounds, which implies the log-Sobolev inequality, because we can send all parameters converge to so that the algorithm converges to the overdamped Langevin, continuous overdamped Langevin, and the bound becomes entropy at time t less than exponential minus t over log-Sobolev constant time entropy at time 0. And this is the exponential dissipation of entropy, which is precisely equivalent to the log-Sobolev inequality. So our bound implies the log-Sobolev inequality. So okay, again, I spend a lot of time here, but the basic message is, yeah, it's really sharp in a number of ways, but we don't recover this diffusive behavior because we are in a much general case where we don't have this square root improvement. And I guess I have to, okay, so from that you have none, well, yeah, just maybe, so depending of whether you believe that dimension is n, or which is a general case, the dimension is n, which is a mean field case, you get a d over 1 to the 4 complexity, because of course you have this delta to the 4 here, which has to kill this. Okay, and if you're in the general case, you get something which is linear in D here. Okay, providing the smoothness conditions are independent of dimension. Okay, you can have depending on your family hidden dependencies. And moving forward, because the time is out. Okay, so other people using entropy methods, they do it with stochastic the Euler, so it's a first order scheme. So we improve with this data for. Methods with couplings, as Katarina presented, so people did it. Here it's stochastic Euler, so again it's first order. I would say, so, and we also did it with Martin here for this whole family again. The interest of couplings is that it's very robust. You can do non-equilibrium. You don't really care about your invariant measure, okay, which is very nice. The good thing with log-Sobolev is a bit the discussion before. You have a rate which is given in terms of this log-Sobolev constant, while in direct coupling, you have these conditions which can be very bad. Okay, you have like a worst case scenario all the time. Okay, so in some cases you can be much, you're more sharper in the log-Sobolev constant, and this is typically the case with mean field processes, as Katarina discussed at the end. She had a very bad Lipschitz condition that you really need a very small non-linearity, and this is not always the case with using functional inequalities like that. Okay, just the proof. I don't want to go into the detail. My point is, when you do a discrete, you analyze a discrete guy, you compare it to the continuous guy usually. Okay, and here the point is that we don't, even if we are targeting we are doing something which converges to the continuous Langevin diffusion, we don't compare it to the continuous Langevin diffusion. We compare it to that guy. Okay, so possibly t can be the step size here. So this is not a continuous time limit. I am just replacing the Verlet step by the true Hamiltonian dynamics. And so possibly this guy also converges to the continuous time diffusion, but this guy is much closer to what I do than the limit. Okay, and this guy has the correct invariant measure, which is all what I want here. Okay, so basically the point was to adapt the Villani's hypocoercivity method of modified entropy, which was written for continuous time Langevin, to this discrete time guy where you have splitted Hamiltonian part and diffusion, and you do them once after the other, and it works. And when you do that, you just follow the computations with the numerical scheme. You get a bunch of numerical errors, and you are happy with that. So this is exactly what I did said before. These are the papers I went through along the lines. And this is something that we are finishing in 1 or 2 hours. I'm not so okay. It's going to be hopefully on archive next week maybe. And it's basically adapting what I just said, so the general result, really to the nonlinear setting, as I said, because possibly the log-Sobolev constant is good. And with that, I thank you with your attention.
Thank you for an interesting talk. I wanted to ask when you are talking about crossing barriers and how memory can help. So how long should your memory be? How do you choose your...
So that's the point of the adaptive method, that you don't really have memory. In fact, you don't keep track of your path. You have a path, and then you have your neural network or maybe a grid. People have been using adaptive biasing schemes where you just keep in memory a two-dimensional function, so you can keep it on the grid. So okay, so you have some sample. This gives you some approximate. So okay, you try to believe that this is your current guess of the measure. From this, you fit. So either you do some estimation of your function, or as Eric van den Eyden was doing, you fit your neural network with what you have observed, and you use that in the next dynamics, and so you continue moving, and so your memory is accumulated in this guy. So typically, if you have a grid, you have an infinite. Typically, in adaptive biasing methods where they have grids, they have an infinite memory because they just keep in memory a sum over the whole trajectory of some observable. Okay, and it's just accumulated over time, and you really keep it forever. Okay, but then you have a bunch of strategies there. There are many things to do. I mean, the general principle to say, yeah, I just need memory. It's yeah, you cannot keep high-dimensional long memory, so you have to decide what low-dimensional memory is good. And typically, in these adaptive biasing things, you need some collective variable of low dimension and things like that. And okay, so, which is completely different.
And you can keep the spatial distribution?
Yeah, so typically these things, so the things I know...
They don't modify...
Yeah, exactly, they modify. But they do important sampling, the point being that, okay, there's several things to say. I would say, when you're doing multimodality, you have three problems, which are to explore, which is to find the modes, basically. You have to sample locally each mode, and then you have to reweight, you have to find the weight between the different modes. And usually we do the same thing. This is asked, these three tasks are done by the same Markov chain, and we ask it to do all that. And typically to weight, you have to do transitions, a lot of transitions between the states. And basically the general idea of the current technology is maybe you should do this. This is three different tasks. Start by doing that. And typically if you don't target the correct distribution, you don't care. You want to find the modes. You don't want to sample, in fact. You don't want to compute, find statistical properties. You just want to see where are the modes. And you can be much more aggressive than doing MCMC. You can look for saddle point or whatever, okay? So this is something else. And but usually, this is first answer. Second answer, so usually what people do is that they indeed explore and sample simultaneously. They bias only in a low-dimensional system where basically they increase temperature. But since it's in low dimension, it's not completely crazy in terms of entropic barriers. And so at the end, it's important sampling. Along the way, you find a good important sampling proposal somehow. And then you reweight to have the correct state.
Yes, yeah, okay. I mean, it's an infinite subject.
Yeah.
It's 3 lines here.
Not completely related to the rest of the talk, but yeah.
Any other questions? So to exclude this cases, you could assume a lower curvature bound. Would that help you in your computation?
You mean a negative or positive?
Well, maybe even 0. Or
So again, what is really nice and what I don't get here, and what is really nice with space-time Poincare inequalities, is that you get a square root improvement for any convex log concave distribution. Okay, which I have this for Gaussian distribution. So and you have this where this 1 over square root of m is 1 over square root of the Poincare constant, which is super nice. And now I don't know. So now the problem is these are L2 bounds for continuous time processes. I don't know how to go to real discrete processes. Okay, so there is one thing that for PDMPs it works, and PDMP you sample them in continuous time, so somehow apart from the fact that you are using L2 distances, so you need a warm start and whatever, and it's not good for me because I like non-linear guys, and L2 doesn't work. But okay, apart from that, yeah, typically if you are log concave, this method gives an improvement. I don't with my entropy, and okay, it would be great to for me to have an entropy method which gives this improvement for general log concave. Yeah.
Okay, I think we can stop here and thank Pierre again.